Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the best recording, the very best recordings, multiple ones, of Bruckner, Symphony number 8. This is it, the last in the Bruckner Symphony series that I have to talk about. I'm so excited, except for the 800 sketches and doodles he made before he wrote Symphony number 00, or whatever the heck that thing is called. This symphony has a certain mystique about it, and the mystique arises from the fact that it's Bruckner's last completed symphony. And he completed it more than once because it's Bruckner. There is the original 1887 version, and then there's the revised 1890 version. And because only two versions is not enough for the psychotic, hysterical nonsense which is the world of Bruckner, William Carrigan, Bruckner's scholar and author of the Bruckner Red Book Bible thing, has invented the 1888 concept version, which is horrible beyond all imagining. It never existed. It was never performed. It was never intended to be performed. It's just a sketch that Bruckner made on the way to revising the 1887 version and turning it into the 1890 version. It does not deserve to exist in our consciousness, but that doesn't stop Bruckner people from doing their usual every stupid sketch, doodle, squiggle, or expostulation that Bruckner emitted along the way to the version we all know and love has to be heard and played and performed separately as an independent work. Happily, there is at present only one recording of the 1888 concept version. That's by Gerd Schaller. And it sucks, it sounds lousy, and you don't need to pay any attention to it whatsoever. What we need to do is sort out basically three-ish versions. There is the 1887 original, the 1890 revised, and the 1890 revised also comes in two flavors, chocolate and strawberry. That is Haas and Nowak, or maybe they're avocados, because Haas is an avocado. I don't know what the other avocado is. It's not a Nowak, but Haas is definitely an avocado. So we have the Haas version and the Nowak version. The difference between them we could also address rather simply. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. All of the arguments back and forth about whether you should have Haas or have Nowak are stupid, irrelevant, nonsensical, and we need not consider them. The difference between the two is 60 some odd bars of music, maybe, I don't know, not very much, maybe a couple minutes of music. And I'm going to play you some of the differences between 1887 and 1890, and also Haas versus Nowak. Well, no, I'm not going to do Haas versus Nowak. Who cares? Silly. Absolutely silly. The differences are not important. But the differences between 1897 and 1890 are important because 1887 sounds like a kind of amorphous, blobby draft for the masterpiece, which is the 1890 version. And I realize there are some conductors and some people who favor the earlier version, but they are mentally ill. All of them. And so we do not need to get into that in any terrific detail either, other than to allow me to play you a couple examples which will demonstrate how much better the 1890 version is. The first example is the coda of the first movement. Now, the first movement in the 1890 revision, the symphony is in C minor. The symphony is a finale symphony. In other words, it's going to end with a grand finale. Bruckner did not write many finale symphonies. In fact, he only wrote 2.5. He wrote the 5th, which is a finale symphony, the 8th, which is a finale symphony, and the 4th, which became, on revision, a finale symphony. But Bruckner couldn't have figured that out the first 7 or 8 times that he wrote it. But it's also now, in its current state, something of a finale symphony. So one of the issues with a finale symphony is that you don't want to ruin the finale, because that destroys the whole point of it. That was why Bruckner got rid of the stupid, I mean unbelievably stupid, musically inept, loud coda to the first movement. The first movement, as Bruckner revised it, is the only one of his first movements that ends quietly. It ends in the minor. It's perfect. He called the revised version a death clock or death watch because it just ticks away, it drains away in the minor key, and it works splendidly. Why he would not have wanted to conclude the movement that way is anybody's guess, but here is Georg Tintner playing what was essentially how the movement is going to end in the revised version, and then the completely detachable, horrifying, fortissimo, major key, repetitious, nonsensical conclusion. So listen to this. I'm going to put a little superscript where the real ending is going to occur, and then you can hear how the music just goes on and on and on for another minute of complete, absolute inanity. It is inane. Here it is, the original ending of the first movement. Appalling, is it not? Just ridiculous. I mean, it doesn't even contain any musical substance worth mentioning. It's just repetitious fanfares, and it's just ridiculous. One of the other things that Bruckner did in making his revisions is cleaning up the repetitiousness of the thematic material, giving it a sharper profile, enriching it with bigger orchestration and a more sort of, I would say, affecting sequence of dynamic contrasts and tension and release. It's all better the way he improved it. And that's particularly noticeable in the scherzo. I'm going to compare a little bit of that because the scherzo is just horrendously repetitious in its first version and very, very one level in terms of dynamics. And then it becomes terribly interesting and marvelous as it's revised. So here is Tintner again playing some of the original scherzo. Ready? Here it comes. And now, here is the revised version. This is Christian Thielemann with the Staatskapelle Dresden on Profil. Not one of my favorite recordings, but a very good one, I have to say. And it only has one stupid, ridiculous Thielemannism on the way to the passage in question, which is a sudden diminuendo crescendo thing. You'll hear it when it comes. No reason he needed to do it, but it doesn't matter. The difference between the two versions still makes its point. Here it is. So as you can see, the revision is far shapelier and clearer in outline and more colorful, and it has more contrast within the section. It's really just objectively better at every point. And that's what Bruckner did in making the revision. So we want to hear the 1890 revision. And as I said, whether you have Haas or Nowak really makes no difference. The only real differences between the two from that point of view are an insert in the slow movement, which Bruckner deleted. It's lovely music. It's nice to have. And a bunch of small nips and tucks in the finale, both all the way through the finale, here and there, a few bars in there, but particularly at the recapitulation. The result in the 1890 version is a finale symphony where the first movement does not blow the coda of the finale, where the entire thing is set up beautifully. Now, one of the interesting ways to think about the Eighth Symphony, excuse me, is kind of as the evil twin of the Seventh, because it's a mirror image of the Seventh Symphony structurally. The Seventh has two big long movements followed by two short ones. The Eighth, by contrast, has two shorter movements followed by two big long ones. And so the two are somewhat related in, conceptually. And it's very, very interesting in that respect. So to know one is, in a sense, to know the other. And the only other thing we need to do now is discuss the actual recordings, of which I have my top 10. But before we get to the top 10, I have to tell you about the horrible ones. There are some horrible performances of the Eighth Symphony. I mean, vilely bad. And there are also some great Bruckner conductors who never actually got their arms fully around the Eighth Symphony, which is also kind of interesting. And I'll tell you about those too. But first, let's talk about the terrible ones. The two most awful Bruckner eighths are Mario Fensago on CPO, who also gets my award for stupidest ever liner note written by a conductor. It's unbelievably insane. Someday I'll just do an entire video where I'll read the note. I saved that recording just so I could save that note because it is so moronic. It's unbelievable. The performance itself is very, very fast, very light, very uninflected, and just awful in every respect. A complete abomination and diminishment of what that music should be. The other horrible version, which goes in the other way, is that whack job guy on Grimola. His name is like Remy Ballet or something like that. And it's done with some youth orchestra, and he plays the whole thing at half tempo. The performance takes, I don't know, it's an hour and 45 minutes or something, hour and 50 minutes, who knows? It's absolutely lethally, vilely horrible, like almost all of his Bruckner recordings on that label. They are just atrocious. That any of these people actually could find the money to have somebody make a recording of their basically musical defecations on Bruckner's name, which is what they are, just astonishes me. There are also a couple conductors who never seem to have gotten the measure of the Eighth Symphony. One of them was Klemperer, who makes his own cuts and things. That's kind of controversial. Another was Joachim, strangely enough, whose Staatskapelle Dresden recording is one of the weaker performances in that cycle. His DG recording is a little better, I think. But again, I don't think he ever really got the measure of the piece. Furtwängler never really had it. It was a twitchy, neurotic performance that adds an extra cymbal crash in the finale, which Barenboim took up, which makes no sense. And even Haitink, his first two recordings, he's done it 3 or 4 times, his first 2 recordings on Philips with the Concertgebouw were somewhat ineffectual. His last one with the Vienna Phil was a little better. I think that was where he finally sort of got himself around the piece, but none of these are my favorites, and we're not going to talk about them anymore. I just want you to know that they exist, because the Eighth is a tough piece to do. It's a tough piece structurally, and some conductors seem to have difficulty encompassing both the grandeur of the work as well as that unique Brucknerian pacing, how to handle the progression of movements, the progression of the musical argument. But these 10 guys all do it, and they do it great. These are all either Haas or Nowak versions of the 1890 final, decent, infinitely better version of the symphony. And with that, but I'm not going to make a fuss over whether it's Haas or Nowak, because like I said, it doesn't matter. We don't care. So, number 1, the historical selection of note, Edward von Beinum with the Concertgebouw Orchestra. This is one of the quickest ones out there. He gets through it in about 72 minutes, but everything is in beautiful proportion. Beinum was just a great musician, and his Bruckner is absolutely idiomatic, musical, intelligent, and superb. Superb! So here it is on Eloquence. Definitely worth considering. At the opposite end of the tempo ratios is Celibidache, the world's slowest human being who makes sense, because that idiot ballad on Gramola has been out Celibidacheing, doing things even slower, thereby demonstrating what a genius Celibidache was, because he's not just slow, he's detailed. He actually understands the shape of each movement and how to project each movement effectively. And once you get into his concept, then the performances have their own natural momentum, which is very effective. This is not the EMI 8th. This is the one that was originally on the Sony video. And I think it's a better performance than the EMI 8th. The EMI 8th is also excellent. The EMI, now it's Warner, is still excellent. They're both very, very good. But this one is my choice if you want Celibidache in Bruckner's 8th, and it's worth hearing. It is slow and monumental as it gets, but really, really quite marvelous. Next, the late Giulini. This is one of his later recordings. It's also quite slow. The only controversial aspect in it is the very expressive and flowing version of the Adagio, which some people find not quite monumental enough. They think that it should be bigger and kind of even slower, even though it lasts like forever. Well, it's 29 minutes. Doesn't get much slower than that, does it, folks? But it's a great performance, an absolutely great performance, which is fabulously well recorded. It's with the Vienna Philharmonic, and it's glorious. It's just glorious. It's a wonderful, wonderful Bruckner 8th, full of serenity and spiritual power and all of that stuff that Bruckner's supposed to have in it. It has it. After Giulini, we come to Günter Wand with the Berlin Philharmonic. Now, the only thing dumber than the various versions of a Bruckner symphony is the various recordings by the same people of the same Bruckner symphony. And the winner is Günter Wand. There are at least, at last count, 7, maybe 8 Bruckner 8ths out there that he made. There are a couple on Profil. There are 4 on RCA. There are at least 4 on RCA. There are a couple that he made in Japan, because in Japan they could not resist anyone who was basically old and decrepit and doing Bruckner. They would record over and over and over and over again. Witness Asahina, one of the most overrated conductors that ever lived, but who got everything he did recorded because he was a Furtwängler pupil who was old and decrepit, and his old and decrepit performances have been preserved for posterity. Now, Wand was never decrepit sounding. He may have been decrepit, but his Bruckner Eighth was one of the glories of the recorded world, even though we only needed maybe one. Two of them would have been more than plenty. This is his Berlin Philharmonic one. A lot of people like this one because of the Berlin Philharmonic. I think his NDR versions are better. I think they are more timbrally differentiated, a little bit more impulsive, but let's not kid ourselves. This is great Bruckner playing and a great Bruckner Eighth, and so I feel obliged to mention it to you now. So this is the Günter von Berlin Bruckner Eighth. After this, we get one that's in a complete cycle, Skrovichevsky, an amazingly fabulous Bruckner conductor who does an amazingly fabulous Bruckner Eighth. One of my first experiences of this symphony was in Baltimore, the Baltimore Symphony. Skrovichevsky came and conducted the Bruckner Eighth. Now, he added a tam-tam. Oh, yes, he added a tam-tam, believe it or not. The Bruckner Eighth has, as you know, two cymbal crashes in the Adagio. And those aren't controversial because Bruckner added them. And in the 1887 original version, there are 6 of them, all at the same place. Another reason never to play 1887, because they actually sound kind of stupid where Bruckner put them. I use the word stupid a lot in this talk because there's so much stupidity that surrounds Bruckner. Everything about Bruckner. It's almost inconceivable how much the lack of intelligence and musicality that surrounds the Bruckner cult, the Bruckner universe, Bruckner scholarship, Bruckner whatever. But, you know, that's another issue that I have talked about quite a bit. In the Eighth, in the Adagio, the Baltimore Symphony had this enormous tam-tam. Actually a very disappointing instrument. It didn't really sound like very much. You had to wind up and hit it like I don't know what, with this enormous puffy thing to make any sort of sound at all. For some reason, for the second cymbal crash, instead of the triangle part, which you don't really hear anyway, Skrovichevsky used that tam-tam. And it looked great. Didn't sound like much, but it was sitting there and he used it, and I just went, yes! And after that, before I was reading scores and checking, I was always listening for the tam-tam part in Bruckner Eighth, only to realize that there isn't one. Skrovichevsky added it. He didn't add it here. He does not. This is his complete cycle with the Saarbrücken Radio Rundfunk Symphony Orchestra, Saarbrücken, and the whole cycle is fabulous. And it's really just a great Bruckner Eighth. By the way, it has a nickname. It acquired a nickname in this thing, the Apocalyptic. Isn't that? See, remember I talk about stupid in Bruckner? Okay, stupid nickname of the century, the Apocalyptic. What on earth is apocalyptic about this symphony? Nothing. It's ridiculous nonsense. Okay, after Skrovichevsky, Karajan and Vienna. Not Berlin. Now, his Berlin, he also recorded this, 3 or 4 times? The Berlin recording is excellent. His earlier Philharmonia, if that's what it is, or Berlin it's on EMI, I don't know, it's also very good. I think it's Berlin, actually. The old EMI Warner one. But this one he did at the end of his life. I saw this live in Carnegie Hall. This is not the performance from Carnegie Hall, but he came with the Vienna Philharmonic and he did it. And it was extraordinary. And even Karajan thought so. He famously went backstage when it was over and said, I don't know how we did it. It was one of the most amazing musical experiences of my life. I will never forget it. And this recording, one of the last things Karajan did, is a worthy memento of that great occasion. It is a stunner. Absolutely fantastic. So that's worth considering. And the Bruckner Eighth Sweepstakes, also worth considering. How many more have I got here? Holy cow. Oh, we're almost at the top 3. We're at number 4 from the top. Loren Maazel with the Berlin Philharmonic. Loren Maazel, He was such a weird conductor, you know. Sometimes what he would do would be great. Sometimes it would be so mannered and bizarre you couldn't even mention it. He did a Bruckner 7th and a Bruckner 8th with Berlin on EMI Warner. This is the Seraphim cheapy reissue. It is fabulous. The 7th was a snooze fest. It's just horrible. But the 8th is great. Absolutely great. If you can find this, it's cheap and it's fantastic. Do not let it pass you by. It is a noble, beautifully proportioned, immaculately conducted performance with maybe the best coda to the finale you've ever heard, or one of the best. It's just remarkable. It's absolutely amazing. So you should definitely get this and add it to your Bruckner 8th collection if you haven't heard it. But now we're in the top 3. Oh, and one of them is quite recent, and they are all amazing. Absolutely amazing. First, Marek Janowski with this unbelievably flattering picture of the guy on the cover here. I mean, he looks like he just sort of stepped out of a, I don't know, his castle in Transylvania. What can I say? But this is a very variable Bruckner cycle. It has its hits and misses. It's with the Orchestre de la Suisse Romande. Not everybody's idea of a great Bruckner orchestra, although these days everybody plays everything and everybody can basically play everything. But the 8th, this is special. This is one of the most intelligent, detailed, exciting, impactful Bruckner 8ths I have ever heard. It's the Nowak version, in case you're curious. I'm telling you, it really blew me away. Absolutely blew me away. It has such color. He brings out the woodwind parts. You get to hear everything, and it's perfectly paced and balanced. It's just a masterpiece of conducting, and the sonics are splendid, and it's on pentatone. And if you can get it separately, listen to it. You'll be shocked. I guarantee it. It will really surprise you. It's amazing. Number 2, Günter Wand again, because, he had 7 or 8 shots to get it right. Well, he always got it right, but some versions are righter than others. And this one is the rightest. This is his live recording from Lübeck Cathedral. And it has everything you want in a Bruckner 8th, not the least of which is that fabulous cathedral acoustic that usually destroys Bruckner symphonies, even though we are told that they are cathedrals in sound, which they aren't, and that Bruckner orchestrated as if he were playing the organ, which he never did. All of that's nonsense. But this recording, he also did the 9th here, and it didn't come out as well because the engineers didn't get the acoustic right. That's what happens in cathedrals. You get too much reverb. It makes a mess of the inner polyphony. But on this occasion, they got it. Damn it, they got it. Amazingly, they got it. And this is the recording if you want to hear a Bruckner cathedral in sound in an actual cathedral. It's the one you got to hear. It's absolutely tremendous, gloriously, fabulously, amazingly powerful, and just a Bruckner experience like no other. So this live one, make sure it's the live. Well, they were all live first. Most of them were live. Make sure this was the recorded in Lübeck Cathedral one. Does this have? It has a date. Maybe I can tell you what the date was. Although I don't know if how much that will help. Schleswig-Holstein Music Festival in, let's see, 1988. 88 was a good year to do the 8th. Get it? 8th. 88. Schleswig-Holstein Music Festival, Bruckner 8, Wand. Buy it, own it, love it, pet it, stick it in your shelf, take it down once in a while, listen to it. However, we have to pick one, and this one may surprise you. It's a little hard to find right now, but hopefully it hasn't disappeared forever. But this is my choice for Best Bruckner 8th. And it has been since the moment I heard it. Ottmar Sweetner with the Staatskapelle Berlin. Right? The Berlin Staatskapelle. Yeah, Staatskapelle Berlin. This is originally on Berlin Classics. This is the Japanese reissue of Deutsche Schallplatten's original version. It's probably findable. There are just some performances that you hear them and you go, that's it. That's it. It's just right. The inevitability, the rightness, the sound, the liveliness, everything is here. There isn't a dull second in this performance. It is, again, like the Janowski, it is perfectly paced, immaculately played, vivid, unfussy, and just saturated with the right feeling of spiritual intensity and humility and everything that you want in Bruckner. Nobility and no BS. It's just a great knock 'em dead Bruckner Eighth. Again, in the finale is astonishing. It has the most extraordinarily clear and powerful coda that you'll ever want to hear. I love it. I love this performance. It just moves me. I think it will move you too. If you can find it, you should grab it. Grab it while you can. It came coupled with Václav Neumann doing the first symphony, I think, originally on Berlin Classics, a 2-disc set. Like I said, this is the Japanese Deutsche Schallplatten, but it's definitely a Bruckner Eighth you have to hear. And some year it will be available again if it isn't now. But wow, what a surprise this was, and what a joyful surprise. I love it when I get surprised by a great version from an unexpected source. So, Ottmar Sweetner, Staatskapelle Berlin. That's the Bruckner Eighth. And with that, we come to the end of Bruckner's Eighth Symphony and also the end of my video survey of the Bruckner symphonies. From here on in, we'll be talking about individual performances of individual symphonies on individual discs. And there are quite a few because they are coming fast and furious. It's like a plague of locusts. I mean, endless quantities of Bruckner symphonies. Everyone's doing them. Most people, as you saw from the video that I discussed this topic, do them badly. So we'll have lots of entertaining things to say about the Bruckner symphonies. But that's my take on the Eighth. I am interested in hearing yours. And please keep on listening. Thank you for joining me. Bye-bye. Take care.